I had someone tell me that middle grade authors are sort of like middle school kids, whereas YA authors are very much like high school kids. So you get like cliques with YA authors and stuff, and middle grade are just like throwing things at each other and like completely immature. So that fits. I'm basically a 12-year-old boy, like mentally and maturity wise.
Is Story Thieves considered young adult, or is that one's middle grade also, right?
Yep. They are all, I even wrote a copy. Yeah, they're all, I didn't realize this when my first series was called Half Upon a Time. And those characters are all like 15 and 16 because I didn't know there was a difference between YA and middle grade. And at that time, my editor was like, no, it's just middle grade where like, you don't need to change anything. We're just going to like, make sure that there's no, at the time she was like, there's no kissing or anything. That's very much changed, I guess. But yeah, and then after that, I guess Barnes and Noble sort of made some sort of declaration that middle grade had to have characters that were 12 or under. So every one of my characters has been 12 ever since. And otherwise, I haven't really changed much in terms of how I'd write. Yeah, it's just sort of, it's a weird distinction, but I know as like a 12-year-old myself, or even as an 8-year-old, I was reading, that was in the 80s. So there wasn't like necessarily a lot of books geared for people who sort of wanted to delve into like harder books, but not find things like, I don't know how old you are, but if you've ever read Piers Anthony,
Oh, sure.
like some of the stuff in there is probably not great for kids. And I just read it, I blew through his series as a kid, having no problems with any of it. So yeah, I just got into all this like more adult kind of fantasy and stuff. And it was all fine. Like I didn't warp my, well, as far as I know, I didn't warp my brain. It was just funny, yeah.
Content was what made me such a loyal reader of Piers Anthony at the time, because like I knew sooner or later there was going to be a sex scene. He never left that out. Oh, thank you, Mr. Anthony.
Mm-hmm. And it's he was one of the authors I wrote to as a kid, and it was like, hey, I don't remember how old I was, probably like 10. And I was like, please write back. And he wrote back like exactly as I would have hoped. I'm sorry, I don't know how to write back. I can only write forwards. And then he like answered a bunch of my questions, and it was just adorable. It was such a nice experience. Like it was like a handwritten note. It was beautiful. And it meant so much to me that it's like, I make sure to write back to everybody I can, just because I know how much that meant to me. And I would never put myself in, I don't know, it's hard to see myself as him in this situation, but it definitely feels like I owe any of my readers that, regardless of whatever happened to me as a kid. But like, it just seems like if that small a thing can like make such an impact, it's always something you got to do. Editor is a huge Batman fan. Like all of her social media is like Batgirl editor and stuff, and she just like, that's how we bonded. But I've never met a bigger Batman fan. And she started out reading Killing Joke, like, and that meant so much to her for a variety of reasons. Just like how one bad night doesn't have to change everything in your life, and you can still, like, there are people out there who want to help you. It just meant so much to her that she's just like, she has an entire Batman room just covered in like art and toys and books. It's incredible. So yeah, it's I don't know, it's just something that like, for such a thing like that, just story that Alan Moore probably, like, I'm sure he put a lot of work into it, but like was work for hire, and he's just like, yeah, just write this creepy story about the Joker, and turned out it meant everything to somebody. It's power
like,
writing.
When Alan Moore is not like worshiping the snake or whatever other crazy stuff he does, he just spills out brilliance on the page like it's nothing.
Oh, yeah. And I love that. I love that story about his fake snake that he, yeah.
I mean, his Swamp Thing stuff was just phenomenal.
Oh yeah. One of my favorites is his Promethea, just both about writing and like communication and literature and everything, but just so beautiful. And that was J.H. Williams. But yeah, I can talk about comics all day.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that the story of Barbara Gordon going from Batgirl to Oracle, and seeing that resilience is, I think, one of the more touching stories he's ever written.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then they did the animated movie version. They just made it creepy and weird, which. But then you get like the Watchmen TV series, where I feel like they improved upon Alan Moore. Like, I think if you gave Alan Moore 100 years to write, he's not writing that version of Watchmen. But
No,
Damon Lindelof comes along and I think outdoes him in some ways.
it was definitely like I feel like they both kind of did a timely story for their times, and like we're just so distant from the 80s now that the original just feels very like product of another time. And yeah, the HBO series just felt so timely at the time. It and I'd never heard of the Tulsa thing. Like, that was all news to me. I can't believe like we never were taught about that kind of thing.
I had, but only recently. My wife is African American, and my father-in-law early on would sit me down and say, "Hey, there's probably some gaps in your history. Let me fill you in." So, I learned that and many other things just chilling out in the backyard with him.
Oh, that's a great way to learn it.
They didn't cover it in school.
Yeah.
So, did you learn about Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech? Okay, well, we've covered that subject. Race, that's done.
Civil rights, easy. You learned everything you need to know.
That's it.
Yep.
Well, I feel like that should be the start of the show. Us talking about Alan Moore and Batman. So you've got Star Wars action figures, and what kind of action figures do you have all over your home?
I have Star Wars. That was huge for me growing up. Like, in kindergarten, I had to do an assignment like, what are you thankful for Thanksgiving? And I found that paper years later, and it just, everyone else is like, I'm thankful for my family or my dog or something. And I'm like, I'm thankful for Han Solo, primarily because he saved Luke, I'm sure, at that time. Because I was born in 1977, so I wouldn't have even seen the first movie. I must have seen it in re-releases and seen, like, probably had like all the books and stuff. It's amazing to think how we didn't have access to movies and everything until they were either back out in theaters or we waited till VHS like developed at that time. And it's like a fascinating thing to me how culture has changed because of that, because we've developed into so much more of like an iterative process based on stories that everyone kind of knows now, because you can watch things so often over and over, which wasn't always possible. Books you could, but things like movies, so you get this larger portion of the population who has seen something and seen it so many times they can quote it and everything, and as opposed to like having to go to like a midnight showing or something to find those kind of people. So you have like this enormous pop culture, like kind of unconscious knowledge throughout our society that you can play with and just delve into and go to really fun places. Which not to segue, but that's actually why that was one of the things that drew me to fairy tales, because it's the same kind of thing. Everyone knows these stories. Everyone they don't even remember maybe when they first heard like Little Red Riding Hood or anything, but it was taught and they were shared at such an early age that people have this knowledge inherent in their mind that they probably don't even remember how much they know about it until you start reading something hopefully like this, where I played with all these characters and I changed them slightly so that there would be some surprises, but I was able to do that because the knowledge base was already there. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I didn't have to go back and explain who the big bad wolf would be, or why there's a giant beanstalk. Those kind of things are already like inherent in kids and adults even, so I could just play with them and twist them and have all kinds of fun with them. So yeah, it's I love kind of playing with anything that there's just that knowledge base is there, because you can build off of it, you can twist it, you can trick people in a good way, hopefully, with twists. So yeah, and I've always kind of wondered how much that affected things, just having like VHS and then Blockbuster and DVDs and everything, so people could binge watch before even streaming and just kind of develop that like love for something that becomes so intrinsic in new stories. So yeah, sorry, I just kind of went off on a long tangent.
It's thing that we're approximately about the same age.
Mm.
So, we have some of the same cultural memories. And I had Superman 2 on Betamax as a boy. And I would watch Superman 2. And then for my birthday one time, my parents said, we could rent Superman 1. And I'm, there's a Superman 1? Oh my God.
I love that. It's just like that's the name of the movie. It's just Superman 2. It has no like that would have 100% been me. I've been like, wait a second, this was numbered. I just would have thought he was like Superman Jr. or something. I don't know. Superman 3 scared me far more than I'm sure it was intended to, with the woman who falls into like the circuitry and everything and turns into the robot. Oh, hated that. Like the stuff where he fights himself, nothing. But as soon as that woman falls into the circuitry and emerges as like a robot, very eerie for whatever reason.
My parents would not let me watch Superman 3, so I didn't see that one until I was in, I think, almost fourth, fifth grade.
Mhm.
So by then, special effects had improved a little bit, and it wasn't that terrifying
Yes.
to me.
That also had Richard Pryor as a strange movie.
Yeah, Superman 3 is one that I've taught, just real quick off tangent, but when I teach classes on writing about how you want to make sure that your conflict escalates constantly through a story and your most exciting conflict should be your finale. Superman 3 is the example of where I use where they screwed that up, because right before Superman fights the cyborg, Superman fights Superman. That's the biggest conflict. It's not going to get bigger than that. And then the rest of the movie kind of feels like a step down.
That's a great writing lesson. I hadn't really even thought about that. It's been so long since I've seen that. I've gone back and watched the first one many times because just it's so charming. Like I don't even want to watch the stuff with Lex Luthor. I just want to watch him like saving cats from trees and just smiling at people and being like, Christopher Reeves is just amazing. But I need to go back and watch Superman 3 now just to get a good writing lesson. That's amazing.
High definition has not been its friend. I find that's true of a lot of older movies. The special effects don't hold up with our ultra high 4K, 8K TVs. And you can see the strings that are holding up Christopher Reeve and all that.
Yeah, I imagine stuff like makeup too, which I'm sure they were never thinking that we would be able to see so much and so clearly. So like the makeup wasn't ever done for that reason, and it was done, I'm sure, to be broadcast like on a flickering screen that the probably wasn't a great focus and everything else. So all of that makes for interesting viewing.
I was convincing at the time, but like matte paintings don't hold up in high definition.
No. And while I'm not, I was never like a big fan of like the special editions that George Lucas did. I can sort of see why he would feel that way, that he'd want to like update, especially for someone like him who was like all about pushing the technological envelope the whole time. So I'm not a huge fan of some of the changes he made, but I get it now watching them and like 4K and stuff. Like it just, you're right. It would have been a disconnect that just wasn't necessary.
I'm sure that wherever he's at, there's a part of him that wants to go back and do a new version,
which would be fascinating.
I would definitely pay.
Oh, yeah.
My wallet already is in my hand, sir. Let's do this. Well, here's a professional podcaster hat on. My guest today, esteemed audience, is James Riley. And you've got a new book that just released, Half Upon a Time, which is another Once Upon a Time book, or a slight continuation. Is it a slight continuation of your or no, Half Upon a Time is the first one, and Once Upon Another Time is the new one?
Yes. So Half Upon a Time actually came out. It was my first book. It was a series of 3. It came out in 2010. So it's been about 12 years. And it's a story of a boy named Jack. He comes from an entire family full of Jacks because there are so many fairy tales about Jacks. I figured it had to be like a family business. But he doesn't want to be a part of that business. His father like is the Jack who climbed the beanstalk and stole from the giant. And the giant chases his father back down to their town and like wrecks everything. So nobody in town much likes Jack's father, including Jack, and he just wants no part of adventure and excitement. I always shift back to Star Wars phrases whenever I'm thinking about adventure and excitement. So he's basically he's in school to learn how to rescue princesses and everything, because that's the only way to advance in a fairy tale world. You have to become royalty if you want to get anywhere in life, or at least to fight dragons and or defeat witches to get their treasure. And he's like, no, I just want to be like a normal farmer. And unfortunately, that's not how life works. And a girl in a black t-shirt falls out of a flaming circle in the sky right above him, and he reaches out to catch her and he misses because he's not very good at this sort of thing. And it turns out that is a girl named May, who is actually from our world, until a 7 dwarfs and a huntsman showed up in her house and kidnapped her and her grandmother. And as Jack hears this, he figures out that it sounds like her grandmother might be the long lost Snow White, who led this huge revolution against the Wicked Queen, and has been missing ever since. So they go to try to find and rescue her grandmother. That leads to a lot of twists and turns that took place over the initial series. But after doing that, like whenever I'm writing, I always plan out the entire series before I start, just for my own sake. I like to, even if things change along the way, I like to set things up. I like to seed plot points as I go, just for my own, like, that's how I like to read. I like to see that an author had a plan and knew where they're going, just because it feels like you're in capable hands. And I love seeing things pay off. So I try to do that myself, whether or not I actually have capable hands. I like to at least pretend that I know what I'm doing, and seed things for kids to discover as they read. So that's a long way of saying I had a complete story in my head for Half Upon a Time. And so when it was over, though, kids would ask, are you going to do more? They want to see more of the characters. And I never really had a story for that. And I didn't want to just go back and do more stories about these characters without having like a solid story for it. And then recently I'd always had it in mind that because this was the original series was about Jack and his family and all these other characters, they involved giants left and right. So I thought it'd be fun to do a story about the giants from the giants' perspective. And that was basically the only thing I ever kind of thought about for over the years. And I just kind of let it sit. And it eventually became the story of Once Upon Another Time, which is about a girl named Lena, who is actually a giant, but she's 5 feet tall. So she's kind of the equivalent of, if she were human, she would be like 5 inches tall. So she's a true giant. She was born of 2 giants. She has giant strength, but her people don't accept her because she looks like a human. And to giants, humans are the rodents who come up and steal from them and get them into trouble and stuff. So she has to hide who she is. She has to, none of the other giants really know her secret except for a few of them. And the few that do always look down on her and make her feel like just not a part of her own culture. And that's kind of led her to exploring down below the clouds, since the giants live in the clouds. And she's discovered the city below of cursed humans that has welcomed her, because they're all like, it's people like Pinocchio and Humpty Dumpty, creatures that sort of were once human and were cursed, or they were born this way, but they are like fully cognizant and everything. So it's this kind of city where all these cursed individuals have ended up, and so they're very accepting of bringing in new people. And it's also the city where the rebels against the Golden King are operating, and the Golden King is my version of King Midas, and he's the big bad in Once Upon Another Time. So he's looking for the cursed city because he knows there's a character named the Last Knight who's leading the rebellion, who hides there, because the cursed city is like protected by this spell where if you're looking for it, you can't, or if you're looking for it with malicious intent, you can't find it. So the Golden King actually has our second main character in his employ. That's a genie named Jin, who is he's the first new genie in thousands of years, and he's only been around for about 12 years as well. Lena is also 12. Jin, actually, there are some Easter eggs from Half Upon a Time where Jin gets, I don't want to spoil things, but one of the fun scenes I got to write in Half Upon a Time was a story about a fairy godmother fighting a genie, because I thought, like, that was the kind of point of Half Upon a Time for me. I got to take anything that sounded like a joyful thing for me, smushing all these characters together and seeing what happens. So I was like, yeah, let's make the genie and the fairy godmother fight. And it doesn't go well. But what happens during that scene actually leads to Jin. And unfortunately, as a young genie, his elders have like declared that he has to serve humans for 1,000 some odd years to learn humility, so that he will be able to handle his magic and his omniscience sort of without kind of taking over the world, because he's got too much power for like such a young kid to really understand. So they've limited his power, they've limited his omniscience, so he can only access his his all-knowing knowledge via a voice in his head, who he calls the cosmic knowledge, and is very kind of snarky and judgmental. And he doesn't have access to most of his magic, like I said. He can basically only teleport or change how he looks. He can only really do things for him, like to himself. But he is in the Golden King has his ring, which is like his item of power. So the Golden King orders him to find the last knight, which puts Jin on a course with interacting with Lena. So this was an idea that like it felt sort of timely, because Lena, who you might realize comes from Thumbelina, it's so much about like how she comes to deal with sort of who she is, and what to do if maybe the people you love aren't really there for you, that they might reject who you are because they don't really understand, or you're just different. So this is very much a book about her kind of coming to grips with her identity and becoming okay with it, while also realizing that some people might, when the Cursed City residents find out she's actually a giant, they initially reject that because they're afraid of giants. And so she has to kind of come to grips with that from both sides, her giant heritage and the people who she sort of fits in with, at least physically, because she's their size. So yeah, there's a lot going on in Once Upon Another Time. It's at the moment, it's going to be a trilogy, and the second book is coming out in September. It's called Tall Tales, strangely enough. And the cover is actually really fun. It shows Lena, Jin, and Lena's giant cat, who is my version of Puss in Boots. He's literally a giant cat. He was her pet up in the clouds. So he's just a normal cat who happens to be wearing a hat that translates his meows into words. So he's not any smarter than an average cat. He runs at the first sign of danger and everything and abandons her, and then comes trotting back and is like, oh, what's going on? Where are the treats? So he was a joy to write, because I love cats. But the rest of the cover is Lena and Jin sort of walking into a city full of very tiny people, which is Lilliput from Gulliver's Travels, which was a joy to write too. I figured if I was going to do the story of Thumbelina, and without spoiling things, the story of Tom Thumb might come in as well. It seemed like a natural to just make some of this related to Lilliput, which was just this is the whole reason I write these books, is because it's a joy to play with so many concepts.
No, I can see it on your face as you're talking. How much fun you've been having and are going to continue to have. I saw that obviously book 2 is now available, I think, for pre-order.
Yes,
I know it's got its own Amazon page. I assume people could be buying it. Have you finished book 3 also at this point?
I haven't finished it. I've gotten most of the way through it. It's going to be out about a year from now, so I need to have finished it. But yeah, it's all plotted out. Like I typically, when I'm writing, I've found that it helps to plot out chapter by chapter now. I didn't used to do that. I used to just kind of very vaguely sketch out a book, and I would do like character arcs and stuff like that, and kind of hit the big plot points, and then I would just kind of just start writing. But I've realized since that plotting it out chapter by chapter kind of eliminates any writer's block kind of issues. If I always know what's coming next, even if I change it, it always feels like I have a safety net. Like I have something, I don't need to worry about what I'm going to write that day. I know exactly, I had it all planned out. And like I said, that might completely change. It might change while I'm writing. It could change, a few days earlier. I might have thrown in a plot point that kind of negates something. But yeah, it just feels like there's like a comfort level there that makes writing less of a scary prospect. And I've written 15 books now, and still every day I was writing is a terrifying prospect. So yeah, that's one of the little things I've learned that kind of helps me. And I know other people are kind of seat of their pantsers and they just start writing when that fully terrifies me. So I don't know if I'll ever try that, but yeah. So it's one of those things that I just sort of have picked up along the way. And so, long story short, the third book, which right now is called Happily Ever After, and it won't be, that is fully like plotted out, and so I just need to get through the ending.
I forced myself once to do a full pantser exercise. Well, I'm going to skip the outline this time. I'm just going to sit down and do this, and fine. But the revision took forever, and ultimately I ended up writing an outline after the fact to help me keep track. So there was no skipping that step. It just came a little bit later in the process.
I've had that same thing happen where I get through something and it doesn't feel right, and then I have to go back and outline it anyway. And like that's when I started doing this. And it was also an effort to find problems like ahead of time. There's so many things that feel like they're going to work when you're thinking of them in your head, and then you get them on paper and it just doesn't, like there's just something that's off about it. And it's so much easier to find those problems when you're just outlining versus when you're 300 pages in and you're like, none of this works, and it didn't work from page 10, and this is a problem. So yeah, I'd much rather take a little time early than end up rewriting the entire book, which has happened.
How much time are we talking just spent outlining?
I mean, honestly, the most time comes with just daydreaming and thinking about it, and like sending myself notes. I email myself so many just random emails with the subject line notes that are just either like 2 sentences or like maybe 10 bullet points or whatever of something that I'm thinking about. So like there's probably a few weeks in there, and it usually comes when I'm finishing up something else. And then I will sit down, like the actual plotting basically only takes like a day, if everything goes well, like just sitting down and like outlining the whole book. But yeah, it's because the real work happened way in advance, and just letting it kind of percolate in my head.
Do you write a chapter while you're outlining a couple of chapters just to get a sense of it, or do you wait with discipline until you have the whole outline, a full plan, and then, okay, day one, let me start?
It's been that way since I've started plotting it out chapter by chapter. Yeah, where I will wait, and it's especially going back to something I didn't really mention, that so Once Upon Another Time is a sequel, but it takes place 12 years after Half Upon a Time. So there's no some of the characters show up, but you don't need to have read the first series. That actually came up in my head though, because it was fun to return to that world, and it felt like a natural progression, and I could kind of just step back into it without having much. I could kind of return to that writing style very easily, and it was fun to do so. So I was less worried about that when I was writing, because I'd already done 3 books of it, even though the voice changes and the characters, because my narration, it's like third person omniscient, but I delve into the individual characters in. So I do a chapter of Lena and then a chapter of Jin, so you get into their thoughts as it's going. So the individual voices definitely are different, but it did still feel like kind of putting on a nice warm hoodie that you hadn't worn in a while. Very comforting.
Well, I'm gonna ask some in the weeds questions just because I'm interested. When you sit down, what do you have before you start outlining? You know more or less who your character is going to be. Do you have some idea of what the progression of the journey is going to be? How much do you have before you write the first thing?
So I would generally start, like, to get really far back, I will start with like an idea of the Thumbelina story, but as a giant. So instead of having like a 5-inch tall girl, we're going to deal with a girl who fits in very easily with human society, if a little tall for her age, but does not fit in with giant society. So that would be where it starts. And then I would I would kind of build up that world in my head, and think about what that would mean and what other characters I might want to play with and where it might go, who the villains would be, and like the themes. So that kind of stuff would all happen just entirely in my head. And then I would start writing out synopses of the books, however many books I planned out. And they would get, the first book is always very, it's always much longer and more detailed. And then I kind of get more vague as the second and third book go. But the big plot points are there. And then from there, I would take all of that and do a chapter by chapter outline, where it gets very specific. It covers like the character arc stuff, the big plot points, and generally everything that happens in a chapter. So after that point is when I would actually sit down and start writing. And I think I'm different from a lot of writers. I entirely just go by, I do a chapter at a time. So my chapters usually end up being about 5 pages in Word. And I try to write 2 chapters a day. So about 10 pages. And I never, whenever people talk about word count, I'm always completely baffled, because word count to me is either 0 or the final product, because I know I have to hit a certain amount of words, but I just kind of, for whatever reason in my head, it's just a chapter thing. So yeah, that's when I start writing, and go through to the end, and then do like potentially 3 to 4 drafts, sometimes 6 or 7 when it's not going well. But yeah, generally that's the process.
Word count is a slippery slope, dangerous sometimes in terms of tracking. I mean, it's better than not tracking, because you can say, hey, I had a goal and I met it. But then if I'm revising and I see that, oh, I've got 200 extra words here that are not needed, this is garbage, let me cut that. And I think to myself, oh, you hit your word count that day, didn't you? Felt good that day. Let's take that out.
One of the reasons I like chapters too is because I love being cruel and ending chapters on cliffhangers and stuff, but that makes it so easy to pick up the next day. Apart from even having that chapter like plotted out, it's nice because you're feeling like you're dealing with something immediate, and there's a resolution to that. And then as you go into the next chapter, it just kind of makes it just a little more, just another little trick. And it's one of those tricks that works out well for me with writing it, and hopefully keeps people reading it. So it's kind of a win-win. But yeah, I love cliffhangers. I love being cruel. Whenever kids tell me that like the books made them cry, I'm like, that's such a nice thing to say. Thank you. So honored.
The thought of you weeping has cheered me tremendously. I appreciate it.
Yes. Oh, it makes me just laugh maniacally too. But I mean, I would never like betray the kids and give them like a terrible ending. I'm not trying to like make them aware of how cruel the world is. I just want to write fun stories that like for the moment seems like they're going to go really badly. And then, I mean, they're fairy tales. They have to have some sort of happy ending. Which is why I love the title for the 3rd book of Happily Ever After, just because the whole book is going to be about entirely how it's not. It's very much like the 2nd book ends in a very Empire Strikes Back sort of way. So it's fun.
Yeah, I was curious. Do you not feel compelled to make that 2nd book a little bit darker, just because that's the template that was set down for us?
Yes, and that's always something I have to both I embrace and also fight a little bit against. Just try not to be too cliche, but it always comes back to it. It's like it's such a classic trilogy to do a darker 2nd book, and this one is going to be it's definitely a little darker, but it's also I always try to ramp up the humor if I'm going to do anything that's slightly darker. Tall Tales is sort of without spoiling the 1st book, a greater threat sort of emerges, and Lena discovers some stuff about giants herself, and where and how they came about, that sort of puts a darker spin on things, and she has to learn like how to deal with that with her own kind of newfound confidence after the 1st book. So there's some darker elements there, whereas things happen to Jin that just make him basically an entirely comedic character for like the first half of the book, which was just a joy to write. And I can't really give it away, but he's yeah, it was just pure fun. So I always try to balance things just so no one's like openly weeping for the entire book. I definitely want some jokes in there.
You know, I had something similar when I wrote my Banneker Bones trilogy, available now, esteemed audience. The second book, I thought, well, this would be the darker one, and it was. But then the third book was even darker yet. Oh no, stop it! We did that already. But nope, it just until we get out of it. I'm like, no, it just I want to ramp up that conflict even more. Turns out.
I mean, Return of the Jedi had some pretty dark moments. I don't know. All of my storytelling always goes back to Star Wars and like Disney movies, but it's that thing where it's like anything you experience when you were young is like the golden perfection or whatever the I don't know. It's we kind of get so influenced by what we experience when we're growing that it's almost impossible to escape. And that's one of those things that like and I'm sure you've noticed, like when I was growing up, things like Star Wars were so like mocked. And you know, enjoying comic books was not popular in any way. So like watching Marvel become just a juggernaut of pop culture and watching Star Wars become, it was always, you know, the movies would do really well, but like just to have people embrace it in pop culture and like see kids like publicly enjoying it and know that like they're not going to get mocked for that, it's just beautiful. And I love that.
I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons for that. One of which is probably just because the capitalism engine got behind it. Like, no, we could reach more markets. We could we could proliferate with this stuff and come on all fronts to increase profit. But I also think that our society, from the time we're talking, you know, from early 80s on, has become objectively more accepting. Where obviously we're not where we need to be yet. We've just had a tremendous racist backlash. Politically, that's all I'll say on that for now. So there's real problems, but just objectively, I think it's better to be a person who feels like you know, a little bit different, or like you have a secret now than it was when we were growing up. And a smaller version of that is okay. When you might have gotten picked on for liking comic books or Star Wars in the 80s or the 90s, and now everybody likes them, it's because somewhere in there we said, you know what, it's okay. Just life is short. Just be who you want to be. Go get it done.
And it's, I mean, the internet has been such a boon for that, and finding other people who like what you like and finding out that you're not alone and you can like share in that, and you can write fan fiction, and you can just enjoy like shipping people. Like it's amazing for all the horrible things the internet has also done, that like it has created such a, it's produced so many communities that can like it feels like you're not alone even if you're in like growing up in some small town in Iowa, which is where I grew up in my teenage years. You can access people who think differently from the people around you, and you can see that there's more out there. And I'm sure it's got to feel just much more like there are better things to come, even if at the time you're in school in like a small town or something, and maybe everyone doesn't really like the same kind of stuff you like. So there's some real benefits to just the connection that the internet has brought us.
Yeah, and it's good for a little bit of humility as well, I think. Because I know that we had the person who was the really great actor who was going to go off to Hollywood. I think lots of schools had that through the 80s, and I probably still do. But now you can go online and you can see just how many amazing actors there are, how many amazing writers there are, and that humility is maybe the wrong word, but perspective of, okay, no, humility. I could be a little bit humble. Certainly this show has been a humbling experience for me in talking to so many brilliant writers, because when we're in the 80s, we don't have the internet. You're isolated. You're the only one for the entire area in your town. You might literally be the best writer of your class, And that feels amazing because you don't have the knowledge of all the tremendous writers who are out there. Whereas now you have that, and it's both gratifying because you're like, oh, I'm not alone. There are so many people I can go and talk to, but it also limits that ego from running wild, is maybe a better way to phrase it. Because I think that has been, I think, for people, a real trap. And now, because you're exposed to how many brilliant people there are in the world, you can calm down a little bit. Like, oh, we are legion. We're going to be okay. And this is good news, but it doesn't have to always be all about me. I say, and then I'm gonna hop off of here and look on social media, and somebody will have literally their devotion is to making things all about me. So that realization, I think, is hitting differently at different times for people.
It's definitely a double-edged sword. Like, I love the concept of Goodreads, and if I go on it, I want to hide in my bed for the rest of my life, just because people rightfully are just, they're being blunt. They'll tell you what they liked about your book, and they'll tell you everything they hated, and that's what it's for. But as an author to go and read, it's just it's I don't know. I'm sure there are authors out there who are very like confident in their work, and who are probably a lot more mentally healthy than I am, and who probably stay away from reviews, but like, that's not me. And I'm always like, are people going to like this? And so going on a site that's just pure, like, made for readers to find books, and made for readers to talk about books, it's a dangerous, it's not a smart idea. I can get just crushed by someone. There's one comment that I will never forget, where someone said about Half Upon a Time that he's trying to be clever and he's failing. And I was like, I'm actually not trying to be clever. Trust me, I don't think any of this is clever. It's just me trying to have fun. I'm sorry that I failed. And it's ridiculous, and I probably should let that go, but it's just one of those comments that has stuck with me. So yeah, it's definitely humbling.
Do you find that you will not ignore, but conveniently forget the 100 positive reviews you read, and then just narrow in on that one-star review?
100%. Like, the positive reviews are so amazing, but they're very fleeting. Like, they're just like, it's like eating sugar, and you get that high for a moment, and then you crash as soon as you see that negative review. Just, I don't know if it's, I'm sure it's just how we're sort of made to look for the danger and the negative, to better like keep ourselves safe, while there are, animals hunting us and everything. But yeah, it's not great for mental health. So I tend to just ignore reviews, not ignore them. I tend to just not seek them out, and kind of try to stay as far away from them as possible. Even positive ones, they can be like 95% positive, and they'll be like, well, and it was a little slow at the beginning. I'm like, oh, that I really tried not to do that. I'm so sorry. I need to fix that. I need to make that better next time. So yeah, it's a dangerous game.
Or you could find yourself, not that I would ever do this, but you find yourself agreeing with the 5 stars. That this book is brilliant, maybe the most brilliant book ever written. I'm like, yes, finally someone said it.
That's just not me. I'm always like, like, what? How did I confuse you? How did I trick you into thinking this is brilliant? I really appreciate that you think so. And I at least I was taught very early on to be, just to thank people if they're giving you compliments, and never be like, they're like, this is my favorite book, and you're like, oh well, all I see are the mistakes, so it's not that great. You like saying that back to somebody who's a fan is just, it's rude, and it's not taking into account that it doesn't matter what you think of it, it matters what they think. So I've always tried to be very gracious, but yeah, I've never been able to internalize any of those kind of compliments, which is probably for the best.
Good way to take a big fan and turn them into a lifelong enemy. Your opinion is terrible.
That's your favorite book? You need to read more. Come on.
So have you ever found, as you're reading, that you find some criticism? Oh, that's actually well written, and that's something I can use going forward. So I'm glad I encountered that. Have you had that experience, or is it all just up, down, and a waste of your time?
Um, Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's certainly not a waste of time. It's just sort of a negative thing for me, just emotionally. So I try to avoid it. But I tend to internalize things from my editor and editors like much more often. For practical reasons, just because they're the ones telling me if the book is good enough or not and whether they're going to take it. But also just they know my writing, they know how I work, and they know sort of places that I could improve, and they've seen all the different drafts and everything, so they're just they kind of have that knowledge. um I feel like most negative reviews are covering things that I already kind of know are weaknesses about myself and that I'm trying to work on. And when things kind of fall outside that category and someone hates something that maybe like other readers have liked, I tend to just think that's just a personal thing. Um, or vice versa. If people like something that other people hated, I tend to think maybe that it just happened to click with that one person. Um, but yeah, it's something I probably internalize my editors and my agent more just for that reason, because they sort of know where I'm coming from and I've seen kind of the evolution of all these ideas. Yeah.
Well, they're also still publishing you, so that's, I mean, that's about the most positive affirmation there could be, right?
It's true. And like, just it's always such a nice feeling to be like, to hear someone who you've worked with and who knows your stuff to be like, oh, this is like my favorite of your books. That actually means a lot. Just because because it's their job, they've had to read all of my books, and so for them to really like one, it's just that feels great. So that kind of praise I do internalize, whether or not they're just being nice, but it feels good.
Well, if they're being nice and they're making an effort, well, the effort is what's to be appreciated, I think.
Exactly.
When you're dealing with what's the established IP, I guess is as good a term as any, when you're dealing with stories that kind of belong to all of us. We've all seen different versions of Puss in Boots. We have some idea, like, how is this going to be better than Antonio Banderas or whatever other version that we
Won't be.
like? How do
That's
you
right.
sit down and how do you sit down and work to distinguish yourself against or from what's already come before you? And then what responsibility do you feel to be true to our shared knowledge of this character?
Um, so when I was writing Half Upon a Time, there weren't so many series like this, like Land of Stories and stuff has come out since, and so it's like there's definitely more to worry about that I don't want to uh, just be influenced by, or like cover the same territory as other people. So it was sort of a little easier when I was writing Half Upon a Time. But my philosophy was always like, we have this shared knowledge of fairy tales. It's kind of like the pop cultural equivalent of sampling songs. Everyone kind of knows where they're from. We know the melody, so it's fun to play that melody in a different song. It's fun to take those characters that we know and kind of put them into a new situation, maybe make them change their stories just by interacting with other fairy tale characters. So like, what if Sleeping Beauty never woke up? How would that change the whole world, or her story? What if the big bad wolf from Little Red Riding Hood was also the big bad wolf from The Three Pigs? That creates like new story ideas. But I also like taking things a little further. So I ended up making the big bad wolf in the original series also the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, because that sort of fit in with this new character I was writing, and it kind of set him up as this tragic character as well, instead of just this sort of animal who was going around trying to eat people's grandmothers and stuff. But honestly, it comes down to um, taking what people assume and then playing with those expectations. So I never want to just have like uh, fairy tale character A and just have them exactly how they were in all the stories we know. And that's not even always possible. Like, there's so many different places we get the knowledge from these stories. Like, you could have grown up watching the Disney version of Cinderella, or you could have read Cinderella as a fairy tale, but kind of tailored for kids, or you could have read the original version, and or one of many thousands of different versions that like popped up all around the world anyway. So it's sort of impossible to be true to any one fairy tale. Even if we're going back to like the Brothers Grimm, like those were all stories they collected, and they were changing because they were just told orally through the ages. So like even their version is just one specific version of that story. And so I think it's about finding like the core of the story, and then also playing with that knowledge so that people are surprised and don't see what's coming. I want them to think they know what's coming, and then I want to pull the rug out just for both for my enjoyment, but also for theirs, so that they're constantly kind of trying to figure out what's to come. One of the things I played with in Half Upon a Time was all the main characters were from very famous fairy tales. And you think you might know who it is, like the main character of Jack. You probably think he's going to be involved with giants. And he is, but it turns out he's actually from a very famous fairy tale. And part of the fun, hopefully, of that series is like figuring that out, figuring out who May is and what fairy tale she's from. And there are clues kind of presented throughout, but you don't really learn until as the series kind of progresses. So it's that was one of the fun things too. Like, not only can I twist the stories that everyone knows, but I can use that knowledge to create mysteries and hint at things, and especially hint like give red herrings and kind of push people down a different path than I want them to go, so I can kind of surprise them with the actual reveal. So it's just a ton of fun to be able to take that kind of stuff. I don't feel any kind of a special responsibility to kind of like making these authentic in any way to like the original fairy tales or anything like that, just because I don't know that at this point, when you think of fairy tales, everyone kind of they have their own ideas. They think of the story as opposed to the version they read, I would imagine, because we get them in so many different ways. When we're kids, we get them read to us, we watch the movies, and they're all different, but there's like that core. So I guess that's the authenticity that I'm looking for, which is like the part of the story that resonates, and everything else other than that is room for playing.
Gotcha. So if you're writing about Cinderella, at some point there has to be a glass slipper. She probably has some evil stepsisters, but beyond that, it's more or less fair game.
Yeah. And like, for example, if I were going to write a mystery about who Cinderella would be, I would probably have, do the Disney thing where like there are animals talking to her or just like surrounding her. And in my sense of humor, that would get really annoying for her. Like, she's woken up by birds every morning and she's like, I'm just trying to sleep. Just please be quiet. That's a hypothetical. Yeah, I don't want to spoil things, but I did write that scene. Because that was the kind of thing that
following you around and singing would be maybe one of the most obnoxious things that could ever happen to you. Like after the first day
yeah,
would be
exactly.
amazing. But by day two, I'm done.
Starts out amazing and then just goes rapidly downhill. And you're just like, just please let me have some alone time. I just want quiet for a moment. Yeah.
You put on my own clothes. I don't need you flying my stuff around.
No. Like this, you don't need to serve me. I don't even know why you're here. Yeah, the character of Cinderella in my books, through just happenstance throughout the books, ends up with a pirate monkey who just won't leave her alone for story reasons. And that was a joy to write too, just because she attracts animals. That's just part of her story. So she has this really annoying pirate monkey that everyone else hates, and she's just like, she can't get him to stop and just go back to his pirates. It's kind of little things like that where you start mixing the fairy tales up and kind of having them overlap and messing with each other's stories, that just creates enormous like fun moments for me.
I wonder if it's a function of the fact that these are stories largely told to younger audiences, or because they've been interpreted so many times that you can play around and do your own version. Where if you tried to do that with Star Wars characters, God save you from the chat room people that are coming for you after you've messed with I don't know, Guido shooting first or whatever other changes you might want to make.
It's true. I think there is a real like advantage in these being older, and so having gone through so many versions. Um, yeah, I don't know if you could do that with anything so modern. So, and it's certainly not something you could do with just like starting from scratch. Like you can't, no one's going to be following your clues if you're making up this world from scratch and like just building out like who these characters are. Yeah, it's one of these kind of unique things you can do with fairy tales, and I'm sure a few other things, Sherlock Holmes stories, uh vampire stories, like these things that sort of have entered our collective unconsciousness that you can play with. And as much as Star Wars, like I would assume like 30 years from now, Star Wars will be in that same place. And we saw a little bit of that with that, I forget what it's called, Star Wars Visions or something, where they had anime studios kind of take the intrinsic idea of Star Wars and kind of go in their own directions. And that was amazing. But it was also done by LucasArts or Lucasfilm. So like they get to play with things the way they want to play with them. And it's not yet. Whenever Star Wars enters the public domain, things are going to get wild.
Well, I'm sure if Disney can do it, they will push that date back as far as they
Yes,
possibly can.
very true.
So, in fact, you worked for Disney, right? When you were first getting started. What did you do for Disney?
Um, the kids always ask, like when I go to schools, they're always like, did you wear a costume? And I was like, no. I That would have been both amazing and terrifying, I would imagine. Uh, Both because the heat in Southern California or in Orlando in one of those costumes has to be intense, and I do not envy any of them. But also just not being able to talk. It's almost like, and I think they do hire actors who know how to move and communicate with gestures and stuff when you're in one of those like full body like Mickey Mouse costumes or anything versus like a princess or something. So that always blows my mind. I was just working at Disney.com, so it was nothing terribly exciting. But I am a huge Disney fan, primarily for the animation, but also I grew up going to the parks, and there's something uh, like that hits me in like the non-cynical part of my heart when I go there, and it does feel magical. And part of that is just because they throw so much money at advertising and pushing that, but there's something about it that like seeing a castle before you that looks pretty real, and even knowing all the little tricks they use with forced perspective and everything, it still gets you, or it gets me, and it's something that like has always meant something. And it kind of goes back to another reason I love fairy tales, which is like in a fairy tale, magic is just a normal, it's basically like science, it's just happening outside. It's not that strange that you end up selling your cow for magic beans. Like no one was typically like Jack wasn't that surprised when the beanstalk grows in his backyard. um and I love that. I love that magic can just happen, and it does happen. And I love the idea that like that would be the world. So that's one of the things about Disney that kind of always gets me. I love that you can go to these parks and feel like magic could happen there. It's like the idealized version of castles and magicians and knights and everything, uh, in a very sort of innocent, toned down way. But there's something about it that I love. So that was the reason I ended up going to Disney. I just wanted to work at the company, and there's always, you can't go and see behind the scenes of something and have it kind of retain that magic. But I got to do some amazing things there that I got to go to Pixar at one point, which was a ton of fun. Um, yeah, it was like the opportunity of a lifetime, even though I was just working at Disney.com, just to kind of like see a lot of the cool behind the scenes thing. I used to go and hang out at the studios because I was in Los Angeles at the time, and just have lunch and walk around where like Walt used to have his office and stuff. And there was something very fanboy about it that just like always tickled me. It was amazing.
Is there anything about the company culture that you carried with you into creating your own stories?
I got published right when I started working there, so Half Upon a Time had already been kind of written. But I don't know about the culture necessarily. The fun thing about Disney is that so many people there are there because they love it. And so there's very much like a protectiveness among people there. You also have just like people who come in because it's a big company and everything, but so many people like truly care, especially in the creative departments and like the animators and everything. They want to tell the best possible story they can. So I guess most of what I got from being there was just getting inspired by like some amazingly creative people. I got to have lunch once with Joe Rohde, who was an Imagineer who built like Animal Kingdom, and just he'd been working there forever, and he's just the most inspiring dude. He just talks about his process, and I want to write. I just want to jump back to my computer and just dive into a story. And he actually, this is something that amazed me and really impressed me. They were doing art for a park that didn't end up happening. And so I won't talk about it too much because I don't want to get sued or anything, but he was showing me that they had gotten, I forget the exact details, but basically they wanted to present like a restaurant in some sort of South American motif. So they had like Peruvian artists interpret Brazilian art, and Brazilian artists interpret Peruvian art. And he was like, I wanted to make it sort of this hyper realism where it felt new and different, but true, like this like larger truth to it. And he wasn't even going to use this. It was just purely for inspiration. Like they were getting this just to kind of develop like their style. And it was just to have that like be the culture where artists are encouraged to like you know, go out and pay other artists just to be inspired by them. That part is truly amazing, and like that will always be the part of Disney that I will love no matter what the current CEO or whatever are doing. There are people there who like are so take their process and their creativity so seriously, and are just working to be inspired by and to inspire other people. So yeah, that part was very like satisfying in every way. And yeah.
CEOs get too much attention focused on them, I think. And I think that's true. Like anytime I see a movie and like this was directed by, if we're seeing like a great big major motion picture, like a Marvel film, like, okay, well, yeah, one person was officially the director, but he wasn't up making the costumes every morning or writing the screenplay. There's a whole army of people that goes into any giant endeavor like that. I think
Exactly.
that's just a sickness of our culture. We like Steve Jobs standing out there, no belt on his jeans, like I did this. No, there's a whole bunch of people behind you that did this. You're just the guy that stands out and brands it.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely something that I feel like there's that American individualism where we're like, yeah, Steve Jobs did it all, or Jeff Bezos did it all. And it's like, especially with Apple, it's like they have so many designers and just people pushing like new ways. And Steve Jobs might have been like, yeah, let's focus on that. But it's like you said with movies too, like the sheer, it's like an army of people making these, and so many creative people, and like people building sets that are going to be struck down the next day, and all their work will be on screen for maybe like 30 seconds, but they still put their heart into it. It's one of those reasons why, like, as much as the Oscars are kind of ridiculous and everything, it's still nice that they have so many awards for all of the stuff that never gets recognized. All the people in the credits who you're just sitting there like your eyes are glazing as you're waiting for the post-credit scene, who don't get enough recognition. It's nice to be able to like show off how amazing those costumes are, or like just the production art, or I don't even know if they do storyboarding, but that seems like something they should definitely be like recognizing too. Those people, like so many Marvel movies I think are storyboarded now just from the start, because it makes so much sense. So much about comic books as like a style that leads to it's kind of like outlining a book. You get to see what the movie's going to look like from all different perspectives before you even have to start. And I'm guessing that's a lot cheaper than going out and filming and then refilming and reshooting and everything over and over. I keep getting off on these tangents about the creative aspect.
Yeah, no, I think it's I don't know if it's uniquely American, but it's part of capitalism's huckster sales pitch, so that if you work hard, you can be Jeff Bezos and have health care, or you didn't work hard and now you don't get health care. You're just you.
Yep, it's something. My wife always points out that it's like, um, we're pushed to see people in poverty as deserving it, so that we don't feel bad. And it's the most like, it's just kind of, it's so dark that that society would be like, oh well, those people deserve it, but we're better, so we can get by. And it's like, geesh, maybe we should try caring. Just to see how it goes. Let's see, like, if we had some empathy, let's just try it for maybe a decade and see what happens. Could be fun.
Even if you don't feel it, just say you do, and
Pretend.
see if you don't
Take,
maybe catch up eventually.
take it till you make it. Let's see what happens.
So we kind of breezed by your origins, and I know esteemed audience loves a good origin story. So you're there at Disney when you publish your first book. How long had you been writing at that point prior to that?
I so I was writing for myself when I was like 8. I would have stories uh that I didn't feel real until I wrote them down. And I would just write them down in notebooks and not show anyone. They were just entirely for me, for my own enjoyment. And at the time, I wanted to be an animator because I loved animation. I loved Disney movies. I loved cartoons of all kind. I have no artistic talent whatsoever in that regard. Like, I can't draw. It's always something I probably could have gotten better at if I'd practiced, but I was always just so kind of discouraged by how bad my art was, that I think I love the idea more of the storytelling. So it took me until college to realize that, like, and some professors pointed out, like, maybe you should try writing a book, because especially, my writing tended to be a little funny and sort of, or funny for me. I don't know if that humor always translates, but like, I think they kind of saw that it might translate well, especially to kind of books for kids or all ages, as I tend to think of them, since I'm writing these for myself. So I started writing basically right out of college, and it took me 6 years to get an agent, and I quit constantly. Like, and that was the era where I had to send out self-addressed stamped envelopes to get a response. And so I was mailing out, 20 or 30 basically cover letters to agents, sending along anything that they might have asked for. Most of them only wanted a cover letter. I was trying to take this book that I had spent a year on and uh, just knock it down to like 2 or 3 sentences. I was not very good at that. So the 6 years was not a great time, and I constantly thought I was going to give up, and I did give up several times. I just didn't think it was worth it. And then I lucked into an agent who had heard the day before from an editor that she was looking for fairy tales. So she was like, sure, I'll read your book. And that was one of, I think maybe like 2 or 3 people who were willing to even like take a look at it. So, or request pages. Like, that's how bad I was at writing cover letters, or the pitch letters. So, yeah, she took a look at it. She ended up, representing me, and it didn't take very long after that before someone picked up Half Upon a Time. And since then, I kind of worked with that same editor for a very long time, and she ended up leaving Simon & Schuster, so I've stayed with Simon & Schuster for now, and I really like my new editor. So it's that 6 years was so frustrating and demoralizing. And I always tell kids when they're asking, I'm like, first of all, practice as much as you can because you'll get better. But always just like, the more you persevere and stick with it, like if I can get an agent and have everything kind of work out, then anyone can, because I was doing everything wrong. And there's so many easier ways to do it now, because you can email, you can go to conventions and festivals and actually meet agents and editors in person, and speak with them and like actually pitch them directly. Sometimes it involves like money and stuff, but it's always, there's so many easier ways to do things now. And from other authors who I've spoken to, they're like, yeah, I had a much less difficult time. And it's so much easier just to send out emails and to attach things than ever to send out like self-addressed stamped envelopes and then wait for 6 months just to see if you get a response. So yeah, hopefully things are a little easier in that way. I'm sure it's also opened up a larger audience to how to do things correctly, which means you're competing with a lot more people for the same attention. And I know from my agent, like the number of submissions that he gets is just mind-blowing. So I have no idea how they do that, but it's a process and it's not fun, but like it can get you there if you stick with it. And so that's always my advice for kids, like just keep going. If you feel that love, if you want to write and share your stories, if you love reading and you love the idea of being that for someone else, like telling your story, something that you see in your head and they're going to read and imagine in their own way, like there's such a beauty and magic to that. But yeah, it takes a lot of effort to get there. So my origin story is very much about being persistent. And even if you give up, like getting back up and trying again, I guess.
What's been your favorite so far reader reaction to something you've written?
Ooh, any kind of fan art has been amazing, especially because I have so little artistic talent, like I said. Seeing both, I mean, that takes a love for the characters that they actually wanted to sit down and draw them, but also just like seeing their interpretation of these characters, like, other than the cover, they may have no sense. I mean, the cover and my description of the characters, but everything else just comes purely from their imagination, and just seeing like all the different interpretations is so amazing. I think it is entirely because I love art so much and have so little talent that that's like the nicest thing to see them take the time to actually sketch out or draw something. And so anytime they send it, I love to like show it off on Instagram and stuff and just be like, do you see, this is amazing, did you see what this person did? I love it, and everyone should praise them because look at it, it's so cool. So that's usually my favorite kind of reaction. And then I guess the secondary thing would be, you're so mean and you made me cry and I can't wait for the next book. Like those they have to come together. Like they still want to keep reading, but yeah, the emotional upset reaction is amazing as long as they want to keep going. If they threw the book across the room and were like, I'm never reading you again, that's slightly less good, but that would be, I guess, slightly impressive too at the same time.
I feel like that would still be better than I read the book. It's fine.
Yes, 100%. That's the worst. I'd rather someone hated it than were like, I was just bored, or I couldn't finish it. That's never a good sign.
James Riley, have you ever seen a ghost and or a flying saucer?
I don't know. I've never seen a flying saucer. I have had experiences when I was young where I thought I was seeing ghosts, and I thought I was like floating down into my basement from my bedroom and stuff. And I have no idea what of that was dreams, because I just have this memory of it being so clear. And I would imagine it's all dreams or daydreaming or something. But I remember looking out the window when I was really young and seeing some kind of creature, ghostly kind of supernatural creature across the street, and showing my parents and then not seeing it. So I don't know. It's hard to tell. But generally, I don't believe in that stuff now. So I don't know if I'm just doubting myself what I saw. I think my interpretation is just like I was a kid and had an active imagination, and I would watch horror movies and I would have nightmares for weeks. So I'd imagine it was more of that than like whether or not I actually saw stuff. But that's what I'm going with for now, just to be able to sleep at night.
Well, then there's the question of which would actually be scarier, that you saw a monster across the street, or that you had a brief psychotic break that could happen again anytime.
I'd never really considered that part. Yeah, that's definitely scarier now.
Things are going fine, but I don't know, a month from now, a year from now, somewhere in there, just another break.
The ghosts just come back.
And then I wanted to ask, if you could work with anything that wasn't in the public domain, any IP at all, what would you seize on? What would you like to repurpose?
I mean, I would love to write a Star Wars book, like without even repurposing it, just something like I'm sure they're gonna do this, but the ideal would be to go into Luke's Jedi Academy kind of thing, that they used to have many books about, and now they've kind of, you know, thrown away some of that to go with the new movies and everything. But like writing that story would be amazing. Like kids going to learn how to be a Jedi from someone who doesn't really know everything. Like just beyond the fact that would be a fun story, like that would mean so much to me, to be able to write something like that, just because I grew up with Luke as my hero. So that kind of thing would be a lot of fun. I would love to work on anything like Sorcerer's Apprentice for Disney, like the Mickey Mouse version, not the the strange live action movie they made. Like any of that would be a ton of fun. But and I would love to write comics someday. Spider-Man comics would be very, very fun. I've put together some proposals for comics, but I've never really kind of gone anywhere with them. I've read Marvel and DC stuff for so many years, since I don't know, but I was probably like 10. So it would be fun to do just from like a nostalgic reason. Just to play with those same characters. There's nothing I'd really want to take and like make my own necessarily, from something that's not public domain right now. Just because I think growing up with it feels too real in some ways. Like it doesn't feel like a story that someone wrote necessarily, because I was reading them as kids, as a kid, like Spider-Man and stuff. It feels like Spider-Man must exist, and these people are just kind of recording what happened. So it feels strange to want to go in and kind of like redo that or rewrite it or rethink it. Whereas something I've encountered as an adult, or just something that I've encountered so many different versions of, like fairy tales, feels like it's open to new interpretation, kind of like we were talking about earlier. So yeah, I want to play in those universes, but I don't necessarily want to like rewrite them.
Fair enough. If anybody's listening out there that has access to Spider-Man or Star Wars, you heard it here. Reach out to James Riley, get in touch with his agent. Let's see if we can make this happen. So well, I'm watching our time, and it's flown by, because it always does when you're having an amazing conversation with somebody who you respect and admire and are enjoying talking to. So thanks so much for being an excellent guest and for making time for us. Sure. For today, we'll hopefully we'll get together and we'll do this again at some point, because you've got more books coming, and I imagine beyond the Once Upon Another Time series, you're going to have more series for us on down the road.
Let's hope.
For today, my last question for you is, if you could go back toward the start of your writing career, middle of your writing career, wherever it would have made a difference, and might make a difference for everyone who's watching or listening to us now, if you go back and give yourself some advice, what would you go back and tell yourself?
The biggest thing I've learned is to be like gentle with yourself, especially on first drafts. I feel like so many people run into disappointment and like, just because things aren't going as easily as they hoped. They see things so clearly in their head, and then translating that into words on a computer screen it's just an imperfect process, and that it only gets better through editing and revising. But you can't get to that part until you've gotten that full first draft down and you get to the end. And like half the time I discover that the story is about something different thematically than I thought it was. So no matter how bad you might think, you know, your previous day's writing was, or like you're not sure about the story or where it's going anymore, and like everything that seemed so clear before is now kind of falling apart, like my best advice is to just be like, it's okay. No one has to read that first draft. It's just for you. It's like building a house. You build that foundation. It doesn't have to look pretty. It's just going to support the rest of it. So later on, you're going to go back and re-edit, or to revise and edit and create something that actually you are at least a little happier with. So that's something I struggle with on every first draft, where I'm like, this is terrible. What am I even doing? It's been like 15 books of that. So I always try to encourage people to just be like, that draft is for you. No one else has to see it. It can be absolute garbage. And then you can shine that garbage up and make it look pretty through future drafts. And that's when you start to show someone. So don't worry if that day's writing went poorly, or if like you do get those, you get your word count, but it's like, you know, half of it is just kind of like you rambling on just to get through the day. That's totally okay. That's what that first draft is for, just getting something down. And then once you have that something, you can make it into something good.
Where can an esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media, and all that good stuff?
My website is jamesrileyauthor.com or halfuponatime.com, because that was my first series. I am on Instagram under James Riley Author, Twitter under _ James Riley _ though I've been using Twitter less because it's sort of a nightmare site. And then I also have a Tumblr, which is also James Riley Author. My Tumblr actually has more kind of process stuff, and every social media site's kind of different, so I get vastly different questions on Tumblr versus Instagram. But if you're looking for news, Instagram is probably the best place.
As always, esteemed audience, for interviews with thousands of authors, editors, literary agents, publicists, book people, the world's best people, go to middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. It will change your life. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.
Thank you so much.